Hi, friends. Logan Clements here with the Better Events Podcast. And in this week's episode, we are talking all about what is day of event coordination and how you can add it to your event toolkit. We dive into more about what that role is, what types of events this kind of role is useful for, as an event host, why you might want to hire someone, and as an event pro, why you might want to offer this service. It's a really fun episode. I know that day of event coordination can be a little bit of a controversial topic in the event industry, but Mary and I dive in, share our two perspectives, and make a case for whether or not you should think about adding this to your toolkit. Without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events Podcast. We are so happy, as always, to be with you today, and we are extra excited for our conversation. Today, we're talking about what is day of event coordination and how to add it to your toolkit. So we are going to get into this topic, but of course, we have our conversation starter to kick us off today, and that is, what is your favorite fall activity? Logan, tell me, please. I'd love to know.
Ooh, I have two. I can't pick one because one is more accessible than the other. I personally just really like walking outside when the leaves are changing and the very like ASMR satisfying crunching of leaves beneath my feet. And I just feel like I've been really trying to savor the season. Savor was my word this year. And so really just try to like pay attention to the bright colors of the trees. I went on a walk with a friend last week and like literally stopped during our walk to like take pictures of some of the trees that had such pretty colors. So I would say just staring at all the fall foliage is really fun and going on walks through it. But if I get my choice, it's eating apple cider donuts. I am like, and specifically ideally at an orchard or a pumpkin patch. I don't really have an interest in picking a pumpkin. I do like apples. I would pick apples, but like specifically, I want the donuts, the warm apple cider donuts. And I have yet to do that just because it's a little tough to get to some of these places outside of Seattle without having a car all the time. But that is my preferred, and I'm going to do it before the end of the season. That's my goal. Mary, how about you? What's your favorite fall activity?
I love that as well, but I know you said you like to get them from somewhere like on location, but they have really good apple cider donuts. I just found at Trader Joe's. So if you need, something to tie you over in the meantime, check them out. I would say mine is to do like a corn maze. I'm laughing, Logan, because we've done a corn maze and it was for tiny children. If even that, it was a little bit of a dead corn maze, but when they're like epic and they're big and they take you like an hour to get through them, those are my favorite corn mazes. I love it because it's different every year. You never know how to get through it. And it's just like a fun little puzzle. I don't like haunted corn mazes, but I love just a normal corn maze. Honestly, though, I don't know if I'm going to do it this year because I've done it every year. And this year I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I need a break from the corn maze, but generally I absolutely love it.
Yeah, maybe a year off. No, listeners, the corn maze Marion is talking about is one that we went to together a couple years ago. And in the buildup, it was like, oh, I'm so excited. She's like, I love corn mazes. Her husband loves corn mazes. It was like, what shoes do we wear? Because we're going to be in this corn maze. And then we piled out of the car as all grown adults. And the corn couldn't have been taller than, like 3.5 feet. It was truly meant for small children and for adults to be able to see their small child trying to get through this not that large of a corn maze, but it was one aspect of a larger like town fall festival that we were partaking in. So I have some lovely, funny photos of all of us standing in the corn, like trying to figure out how to get out of the maze that is definitely up to like our chests.
Yeah.
So hopefully that makes you giggle with that visual, but a little bit into more of why we chose this week's topic. I feel like we got this question from one of you listeners about, day of event coordination, if this is something to offer as a business or what does that even look like? And I also feel like this is kind of a debate discussion we often have with other folks in the event industry, other planners. I know certain folks feel very strongly they love to do this. And I know other folks who are like, I would never do this type of role ever. And listeners, whether you're in one camp or the other, I think our big overarching takeaway for starters is there's no right or wrong answer. So you're just going to get Mary and my perspectives on this, of what it is and how you can add it to your toolkit if you're interested. But before we dive in, Mary, do you want to tell folks a little bit about our conference coming up?
I sure do. So on December 18th and 19th, as many of you may know, we have the second annual Better Events Conference, and it's happening one day in person in Tacoma, Washington, one day virtually. And we have the content starting to be built out. It's actually pretty well flushed out. We're so excited to what's to come. One of the things that I'm excited about is I've been talking to some individuals who have the all access pass, which means they're coming to both days of the conference. And so as we're talking about the in-person component, we're saying just like, we're really excited to see you. It's going to be awesome. Like you could come a little early and we can like do this little like pre-get together. It's not official, but there's just talks of, if you're going to be attending the in-person component, of some just times to kind of gather. And then of course the actual conference, but we're going to try to make it worth everyone's while. And I'm just excited to be able to have those experiences gathering together. And whether it's for the in-person or virtual part, I think that we're going to have some really good times together. So I'm looking forward to that. And we invite you all to join us if you haven't already. So please purchase your tickets, and you can visit bettereventspod.com/conference to do that. So we hope to see you there. And now we're going to get into our discussion for today's topic. And so, as you know, we like to start off at the very beginning, the basics. And so, Logan, what is the definition of day of event coordination?
I'm going to do my definition off the top of my head, Mary. Well, I'm sure you're going to Google it so we can have an official Google/chat GPT definition of this. But I think day of event coordination is a little bit of an oxymoron, because I think some people think day of literally just means you're planning on the day of. But a lot of times there is some prep that goes into it. But how I would define a day of event coordinator is your primary goal and role is executing the event on the day of. That prep work can really kind of span the gamut from maybe only a few hours because somebody else has done all the planning and they're handing you everything you need, and you just need a few hours to make sure you're familiar with the timeline, with the key people, and then you're the one on site actually executing the event. And then I know other folks who that day of coordination includes, 30 hours or some kind of like more month of. I feel like our wedding friends day of coordination is really turned into more of like a month of. So 30 days out, they start downloading and understanding the information. But it is a much smaller scope in my head in terms of like the amount of prep work and the planning where you're really more executing. Mary, does Google agree with me, or do you agree with me?
No, you're wrong. And of course, yes, that is definitely on track. I do want to share what Google said, because now when you Google things, it has the generative AI like at the top and it summarizes the page. I love this so much. I think it's an amazing feature. So it's kind of a lengthy response, but I do want to share what it says because it's actually really interesting. So it says day of event coordination is a service that involves hiring someone to manage the details of an event on the day of the event, or longer, with what Logan said, but it talks about what that means. So it says timeline management, ensuring the event runs on time and coordinating with the vendors. Vendor coordination communicates with vendors to ensure they're in sync with the timeline. It's kind of funny because those two basically just kind of said the same thing. Problem solving, handling unexpected issues. Detail execution, taking care of the small details, such as making sure the DJ knows how to pronounce names. Maybe this is more wedding specific, but and then
I'm sorry, wait, generative AI, who hurt you?
I know, right? Who hurt you? That's like the one very specific part of this answer. And the point of contact, and then just so serving as the go-to person for questions and concerns on the day. So I thought that was a good summary.
That's a pretty good summary. But once again, why you and I still have jobs, and AI will not replace us, because if you read that and thought the only important job is that the DJ knows how to say the folks' names, there's a lot more to it. That's just one tiny, teeny, tiny piece. But yes, I agree a lot with that definition. I also, as we talk through these examples, listeners, I think going into our next question of like, what is the typical role of a day of coordinator? I want to challenge us that there is like the lead day of coordinator, but I also think, and Mary, we can take this in that direction of like, there are also a lot of like day of roles that both you and I have played where we're not necessarily the overall coordinator, but we are getting brought in day of just to do this
To
smaller
coordinate a piece. Yeah.
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 So I guess typical role of like the day of overall coordinator is very similar to what our generative AI, talked about is you are like the lead planner, producer, manager, whatever you want to call yourself. You're the lead person on site executing it. So for example, I've done this for another planner who had multiple events on the same day, couldn't be in multiple places at once. So they did all the lead up pre-planning and then they hired me just to come on and they'd built the timeline, they'd hired the vendors, they'd put everything together and they were just handing it over to me. So I was coming in and being a member representing their company, but executing the event. And that was one personally, it's something that I found was really interesting to do because I love getting to speed date and get to see other people's systems and like how this other planner organized everything. But I also found it was like a different shift than someone when you're in it. You like know all the information for weeks at a time, the key players. So it's a little more stressful to just get like thrown into it, but seen as like the authority figure of like, okay, Logan, yeah, what are we doing here? And I'm like, okay, I gotta, shorter recall for how soon I've heard this information. And there were certain things that like I usually like ahead of an event I didn't get from this planner. And I was like, oh no, I have to like think on my feet and react and do it, a little differently. But I, for that example, I was coordinating everything from the setup for the event. We had some talent, some speakers, we had some food and beverage. We had some volunteers helping with registration, checking folks in. And I was like the lead person for all of that. I wasn't on the mic talking or anything like that, but I was behind the scenes making sure all of that stuff ran well. And I worked with the venue and the photographer. That was all under me as the day of coordinator. You have as like a typical lead day of coordinator role.
Yeah, similar to that. When I'm like selling it, I will typically say we need at least one prep meeting. So similar to what you were saying about pre-event, but I want like, if nothing else, 1 hour where they just dump all the information off to me. And by that time, I'm hoping they have some type of run a show or timeline, or I just want them to send me anything and everything, a program copy, literally anything I can review. And so I'll say like it's 1 hour with them in a meeting, and then I'll spend 1 to 2 hours of just like event familiarization is what I call it, where we just review all of their stuff. So then we show up on site, and then it's like Logan's saying, it's that true, like overseeing role where you show up when you get access and you leave at the end of the day. It's like it's a day of management thing, but you're just doing it kind of on the fly. And so that's exactly what it looks like. And I'll always say like how many hours that is. I think that's really important to do when you're thinking of day of coordination. Like, what is the expectation? Are you there literally the whole day? But I'll usually say, up to 12 hours or something like that. And then one thing that I've been thinking of lately, and I think is interesting to call out, is that as part of your day of coordination role, one could argue, if you're doing the overall, like management coordination is, or like overall planner, for just day of, that I think it's the responsibility of them to stay until the venue like is closed, until you have to be out of the venue, because that's like in a contract, right? And I've been thinking of that lately because I wonder how many like event professionals kind of just like leave. But if you're the overall planner, I do think it's your responsibility to stay and make sure the client is out on time and all of those things, and they've done the things that they're supposed to do. But the thing that will help you be successful in that is making sure you have contracts beforehand. I love when they'll give me access to their contracts, so I make sure we're fulfilling what the venue needs, even if it's just day up. So I do think you can just roll in and do what needs to be done. But if you can just be prepped a little bit with any information that they can pass off to you, you'll be so much more successful. So that's what I would add. I think it can look a lot of different ways, but that would be the main way for an overall day of planner.
No, I couldn't agree more. That's a really, and I also like how you phrase that event familiarization, because that's why I say the oxymoron, a little bit of a day of coordinator is it does take more than just day of. Because if you've ever volunteered for an event or dealt with volunteers for an event, they are sometimes like truly day of, and they show up and you're trying to download all the information and throw them into situations. And even in that scenario, I have taken my own advice where I'm like, most people need time. We all have different like learning capabilities, learning I don't know what you would say, but strategies, things that work for us. And I'm like, often most people just need time. So having like a prep call ahead of time with volunteers, it's optional, but just a way for those that need a couple days to process the information, they have that time. Or if there's someone with a ton of questions, they get to have that time that's not taking up your day of time. So yeah, I like that, Mary. I'll have to add that into some of my proposals and or just justifications when folks say, well, why is this so expensive for just day of? It's like, well, it's technically more than day of because you want me to hit the ground running when I'm there. So before we continue with this week's episode, here's a quick ad about our 2024 Better Events Conference. If you're looking to grow and connect with other event pros, this conference is for you in December. It's going to be Wednesday, December 18th, Thursday, December 19th, 2 days of conference fun. The 18th on Wednesday is going to be all in person in Tacoma, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And then Thursday, December 19th is going to be 100% virtual. We are offering 2 different tickets this year, an all access pass that gets you both the in-person day on the 18th and the virtual on the 19th, as well as a general admission virtual only for Thursday, December 19th. We had so much fun at our first conference last year. We cannot wait to see you and meet you. So get your tickets at bettereventspod.com/conference. Mary, we've hinted to this a little bit, but what types of events is this kind of a role useful for?
I think you could argue like any event. I think no matter what, at the end of the day, it is sort of complicated. Like there is that moment of you are, even with as much prep as you can do for this day of coordination piece, you're still going to get thrown into things. And so it's going to be a little bit complicated no matter what. So with that in mind, I'm like, it could be any then because they're all going to be kind of hard in one way or another. I'm trying to think if there's any events that like this wouldn't work for. What I know what it's super common in is weddings, like day of wedding coordinators, I think is really common and people can sometimes afford those more than they can afford full planners. And so they'll go the day of coordination route. So that seems like pretty popular in that space. I myself have hired, day of coordinators because if I'm not able to be on site, Logan, that you've had that role too, you've shared about it. So I don't know that I'm thinking any kind of event that it couldn't really be used on. Logan, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like the only exception to this would be for like in-house events. If you have an in-house planner or event team, like you wouldn't necessarily need to hire this role because somebody on your team is going to be doing that unless you have either multiple things happening at the same time and like multiple events at the same time. You physically can't be there. You should always have somebody wearing that hat, whether it's a day of coordinator or it's someone from your in-house team, where I think that would be useful. And then yeah, I agree with you, Mary. I think for any event where you, as the event host, want to get out of the weeds, because it is mainly that they're coordinating across all these different vendors, and you say the venue and talent and people and all these things, having somebody who's in charge of all of that so that you get to focus on, either enjoying the event or maybe you're speaking at the event or whatever the event goal is. If it's networking, like you want to free yourself up for networking. So you're not worried about, is there enough ice with the drinks? Like that's the coordinator. Somebody else or a day of event manager or whatever could be handling that. So yeah, I think conferences need it. We even have it for like day of coordinators. I have these for some of my big corporate conferences where I'm overseeing breakouts. Like I do the breakout production with all the lead up time. And then I hire people who help me just day of, because physically I cannot be in all of these spaces at once. I could maybe do it all by myself, but my reaction time would be slower because I have to get across 3 huge floors, like versus just getting multiple people. So I think I'd also highlight some events need more than one day of coordinator and or a team, which to your example, Mary, with like weddings, you are seeing that some planners are one person, and I feel like folks who have more experience are realizing you probably need 2 bodies at most events just to have those extra set of hands for the things that happen day of.
Definitely. And as we're kind of thinking of this as an event host, when is it worth having a day of coordinator? I think you've just described some of those moments, Logan, but can you add to that a little bit more? Why would they want this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little naive to think all of your vendors and stakeholders are just going to do what they need to do at the right time without having somebody there to answer questions, to make sure things are running on time. If they're not, to troubleshoot in the event of it happening. So honestly, to me, you must have a day of coordinator. I will say that again, going back to, unfortunately, this coordination, and I empower you listeners, you can always change this day of insert word here. It doesn't have to be coordinator. I think a lot of folks think of weddings when you hear this term, but you could be manager, day of event manager, day of producer, whatever. But it's just, again, alluding to that you're just there for the event days. Because the one thing is with weddings, there's a lot of people who have a wedding, who get married, who are not in the event industry or in the wedding industry. So they're not necessarily understanding how much goes into it. And so there are plenty of weddings that happen without a coordinator. So it is not a requirement to get married. You can totally get married without one. You could totally host an event without a coordinator. But just if you've ever experienced an event without one, and then you've gone and experienced an event with one, those are two usually completely different experiences. And I do know some vendors that will not work certain events unless it has a dedicated planner or a coordinator. And I do want to highlight that what we're describing is different than if your venue comes with a coordinator. A venue coordinator is a different role than what we're talking about. And I know some events that have work with venues all the time. They love that venue. They think their coordinator at that venue is great. And that venue coordinator can be the one who can help manage some of those vendors that come in, the drop-offs, the pickups, the setups. But my big difference of what's the difference between like an external day of coordinator and a venue coordinator is the venue pays the venue coordinator. So at the end of the day, if there's any situation you're in where it's the benefits the venue or it benefits you as the event host or your attendees, they're probably going to choose the benefit for the venue because that's who pays them, versus a day of coordinator or an external person. They report to whoever's paying them, you, the event host. So they are going to be acting in your best interest because you're their end client. So those are the differences. It doesn't always conflict, but there are key moments where I do think those motivations are different.
Yeah, definitely. I super agree. And I think just at the end of the day, like if you think of a bride, like I think it's crazy that a bride has to be like the day of coordinator in some cases and like do it all by herself. But yeah, and then in other cases too, like the CEO of an organization, it would be kind of crazy to say that they're going to coordinate this whole event because they're speaking and they're doing things, even though they have decision-making power. And I think that's sometimes what we run into is the person who has decision-making power gets assumed to be like the day of coordinator. And that's a terrible situation because they have like other things that they should be prioritizing in this event. And so it's like Logan said, just a super, super valuable role, whether you're hiring it out or you're identifying somebody on your team, but it's just that point person who can be the go-to for questions, or if nothing else, field people in the right direction to kind of keep them away from the CEO, the bride, or whoever it is.
And Mary, for this next one, I feel like you've alluded that you do offer this. So as an event planner or an event planning company, like when and why is it worth offering day of services?
I think it's nice. The biggest thing for me is it's a selling point when an organization or someone doesn't have the funds to do something more than that. And so now I've trying to kind of changed our proposals. So when I'm sending a proposal, I put like 3 packages, and one of them is always just day of coordination because I want them to be able to see just the price differences and the values, I guess, that they're getting for different things. And that also helps me because I'm a people pleaser. We talk about how pricing is hard. And if I send them like this full all inclusive proposal or whatever, I'm afraid I might like sticker shock them or who knows, something. So if I can just like give them another package option that's day of coordination, they can kind of find something in between that might work for them. And so we definitely offer it. I think it's worth it. It's also it's one of the more stressful things I think that you can offer because as we've said, you're just like being thrown into it, but it's also, dare I say, not terribly difficult because you are an event expert. And so you really do a little bit of prep and then just show up. And that is a little bit different. You could also argue that you have a little bit less stake in the game. Obviously, no matter what your client is, you want them to be successful. But when you've been part of the planning process for months and months and months, you just naturally feel a little bit different than when you're just like, I'm just showing up day of and I'm going to make it happen. It just feels honestly a little bit less stressful in a weird way, even though it's hard. So that's my opinion. But I think that's why it's worth offering as one of your services.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I feel like I put it in there. I offer day of because for me, it's a capacity thing. I don't, as a single member company, just me, I've realized like there's only so many events that I can have the space for in my brain to be doing really intensive pre-production or pre-planning for. And I have some clients where it's like 200 hours or 250 hours. That's a lot of hours, folks. And unless I want to be working 100-hour weeks, like I truly cannot take on 20 clients at a time that do that. I can't even take on 10 clients at a time that can do that. Can I stagger them and take more on? Yes. But I've found by offering some of these day of roles, I'm able to increase my capacity because, like Mary said, they don't take as much prep time for me. So, and I still get to feel like I'm using my event skills. And then back to my speed dating thing, I love getting to just like jump in on other people's systems. And this is a way to do that, to just kind of test out the waters, whether it's working for another planner or another agency or another company. And it is also a way to reach some clients at that lower price point where they aren't able to afford to bring you in throughout the entire time, but they are looking for your expertise on the ground to help them execute it. And so that's one that I know I love, just the variety of it and getting to try it and work with different people that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Definitely. What other Logan types of day of roles are there? You mentioned this earlier, like registration management, stage manager. There are so many other things. And I love that we're taking this spin on it too, because as you said, day of coordination doesn't always just mean the main planner. There are so many other things as well. So what would you say to that?
There's so many others. I mean, I feel like you could almost break out anything, but if you're someone who's new, yeah. So registration manager, that's a big one. I feel like a lot of events hire, and I know like Mary, a lot what you do with fundraising events will hire a registration manager, and that's essentially someone to come in and own, I don't know if you call it registration, but like registration, checkout, all of that. You own that piece, and you would work with whoever that day of coordinator or the lead planner is, but you're essentially getting delegated everything for check-in with badges, checking IDs or gathering any payment information or anything like that's handled by you. And you sometimes then are overseeing volunteers. I get stage manager. Volunteer manager can sometimes be broken out to be its own thing, especially when you have lots of volunteers. I have an annual client I work with that I do kind of registration management / volunteer manager, mainly because registration's all run by volunteers plus me. And then it's really just a big crush of registration at the start of the day. And then after that, it kind of trickles down. So I'm able to help, manage, make sure they're just rotating for their different roles and things like that. And on the production side of I'll pause there actually before I go into some production day of roles. Mary, how about you? What are some other day of roles that you come across?
I think you identified the key ones. The one thing that is popping in my mind is maybe vendor manager, but I don't think that I've necessarily hired specifically for that. It's more been like a really key piece of some day of coordinator person, but it's worth saying. You were about to go into production, but I was also going to say virtual events are still happening. So definitely like a virtual producer, that absolutely is something that like we still hire for. And then, yeah, I feel like those are probably the main ones. So Logan, take it away with your production side.
Yeah, the production side, it's like, I think show caller, I love talking about show calling. That's usually a day of kind of role with some minimal prep hours. And then a really easy way, if you're someone listening to this and you're new to the event industry and you're interested about production, and I do think they offer this, some companies do, not in the production sphere, but more the general planning, but just like a production assistant. Almost any big show I do, we need what you call them a PA, a production assistant. But what I found is you can be all ages, all experiences levels, and it's just a great way to get your foot in the door with some of these larger companies, these larger agencies. It can be as simple as needing to like run and grab coffee for people, which if that you feel like that's very below you, then this isn't the role for you. But it can also involve you like jumping in and getting to be a stage manager for a session. You are like essentially extra hands. And I love working with amazing production assistants because that's how I always treat them. It's a jumping off point for whatever they're interested in. And that is truly, though, I know some folks who listen to this podcast love that because it's just show up, be an extra set of hands. You're not in charge of the whole event, but you get ownership of these little tasks, these little things that you need to do. So it's a little bit lower stress, I feel like, way to get in on these events. And again, those usually involve very minimal prep, maybe a call or two, like Mary said, and then 1 or 2 hours to familiarize yourself with the event. But I'm sure there's other ones that you guys listeners know of. I feel like now, Mary, I feel like listeners are probably wondering, like, how do you find or get hired for these types of roles, whether it's day of coordination as the leader or like registration management, stage manager? I feel like you're probably more on the hiring side, or getting hired. What do you think?
Yeah, both definitely. It's still something that a role that I love to take on because like you're saying, it's easy to like fill in kind of for free. But I would say a key component is like another planner hiring another planner or another event professional hiring another event professional for this role. I think that's like the most common situation. I know I mentioned earlier that sometimes it's, pitching clients on it if that's all that they can afford, but more commonly for us, it's like me hiring Logan, Logan hiring me, like that type of like situation, which I think is very valuable because it's a way for you to be able to collaborate with your peers. And I think that's super awesome because there's the ability to know that there's someone that you can bring in that knows the stuff, they know the industry, like, event professional to event professional, I think is one of the best ways that this has worked out for us. But Logan, how about you? How do you find and get hired for these types of roles?
Exactly like you said, it's people hiring people. It's none of almost I'd say probably 95% of these roles don't get posted online. They're not on LinkedIn. They're not a job description you can apply for. It is somebody putting together their event team and being like, darn, I need a production assistant in Seattle. And that person is usually then going to turn to their network to either if they think of someone or if not, they're going to turn to someone they trust. Like Mary, I turn to you all the time for this of like, hey, do you know someone who would be really good in this role? Because I know you and I have met someone and I just can't think of them. And so if you're someone who's looking to get hired to do these roles, the best strategy you have is just connecting with other event professionals, other planners, other people who literally do what you do, and or maybe are doing something maybe slightly bigger than you're doing, because those bigger people with bigger events often have then more roles they need to fill. But once you've made those connections, don't stop there. You need to keep reminding them you exist, not in a spammy way. Don't be hitting them up every week or even every month. But like I take almost on like a quarterly approach to some of my key folks that I know are people that I trust, I like working with. I'm reaching out to them at least once every 3 months, just to, again, remind them that I exist. Ideally add value. Maybe it's an article or something I thought of. I saw a snack that we all loved when we ate on site together, and that just made me think of them, just something personal. And then I'm reminding them the types of roles that I'm interested in. Nothing is more forgettable than just saying, hi, I want to work events. Let me know if you have any role you need help in. That like doesn't stick in my head. But if you say, hi, Logan, I'm really interested in stage managing, or I'd love to be a production assistant, I'm just trying to get, into production. One, stickier in my memory. Two, in my search feature in my Gmail, when I have to go in and search what production assistants do I know, if I search the word production assistant and you put it in your email, it's going to pop up and it's going to be easier for me to remember that's what you were interested in. So just getting really specific. And being open to say, yeah, this is what I'm interested in, but I'm also open to other ideas. Sure. But get specific for at least an initial idea of what you'd want to do.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's super awesome. And there's lots of opportunities out there. So hopefully this motivates you listeners to try it if you haven't or expand on this. So Logan, our last question for today, what can you learn or gain as the event professional for offering this?
Yeah, day of coordination. I think it is, like I said, I love the variety of it. I think it is an extra revenue stream for you that takes a little less effort than maybe some of your bigger clients. And I think for me as a business, it's been really strategic to have both those big clients that I do a ton of pre-production for. I'm really all in it. And then sprinkling in a little bit of this day of coordination. And then, like I said, it's just also helped me expand my skill set and get to work with different people. And that last tip we gave you is to connect with other event pros. The best way to connect with other event pros is to work an event with them. And you don't understand the amount of community building that happens where you get brought in on an event, you then meet the other people working the event, and then later on they bring you into some other event. Like it's just very fascinating, the whole event world, that I think you can make a really good impression just by doing good work. And so I just encourage you, if you haven't tried it, try it out. I don't know any professionals in my inner sphere that just offer this. Maybe I think in the wedding industry, there are some planners that just do day of coordination. That's like the only thing they do. But I think for most people that I'm familiar with, this is something that in addition to maybe some of the deeper other work that we do. But Mary, how about you? What can you learn and gain as an event pro offering this?
I agree with everything that you said. I also just think that it's kind of fun. Like this is a role that I think is enjoyable. When I have the opportunities, I'm always like, okay, let's do it. It sounds kind of fun because my favorite part of the event is on site. And so it's like, that's exactly what it is. So I'll add that. I agree with what you said and just try it out. Like Logan said, I think that this is something fun. You can see if it's something that you enjoy too, but it is a very valuable thing to be a part of. So this is a fun discussion. Please let us know if you kind of will dive deeper into event coordination or maybe what you love or hate about it. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes, day of. Like I said, we teased it at the top. It is a hot debate. I know a couple folks out there who hate this, and that is fine. You can totally exist, but hopefully you learned a thing or two. And before we wrap up this week's episode, Mary, you have our bonus tip this week.
Yes, I do. Okay, so this bonus tip is a joint one with Logan because this happened with us recently. But one thing that would be great is if you have a stage manager to make sure that you have a dedicated runner for your stage manager when there's a lot of props involved in the program. So you can line all these things out before, but if there's a lot of running back and forth or movement within the program, it will be helpful to have one dedicated person just for your stage manager and they work together to make sure everything is in place. So that is our bonus tip for today.
Look at that. That's another day of roll right there. Way to somewhat tie it into our thing. And that I guess they could be a volunteer too. But thank you, Mary. That is a great bonus tip. Listeners, that brings us to the end of this week's episode. You can follow us on social media at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can always connect with Mary and I directly on LinkedIn. Thank you for those of you who have already reached out. We love hearing from you. And if you want more Better Events content, make sure you register for the 2024 Better Events Conference at bettereventspod.com/conference. We also have our amazing private community over on Substack. So if you are a subscriber to our newsletter, you get a free version. But if you upgrade to the paid community, you get a couple extra bonuses and you get to know that you're supporting Mary and I and everything we're creating with this podcast. But as always, we want to thank you for listening and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.